Hello everyone, and welcome to the Tome of Silver, the show where I randomly select a game from my collection, review it, and add it to an ever-growing ranking list. Square Enix has always been considered among the champion of RPG developers. Final Fantasy, Chrono Trigger, Dragon Quest, Bravely Default, Square Enix has no shortage of some of the biggest RPG franchises to ever grace the world of video games. Even with all these franchises though, in 2017 Square decided to try something new, and created a brand new RPG, exclusive to the recently released Nintendo Switch. And so, the game was unveiled, with the working title Project Octopath Traveler, and thank goodness this was just a placeholder name for the project. Nobody would give a game a title that stupid.
Octopath Traveler.
Name aside, the game immediately caught the attention of many gamers with its striking sprite work, myself included, and I kept a close eye on the game leading up to its release. The game would be produced by Masashi Takahashi and Tomoya Asano, who previously helmed the well-received Bravely Default for Nintendo 3DS. The premise of Octopath is that there would be 8 characters, each with their own unique story to travel through. Get it? It's called Octopath, cause Octo means 8. There are 8 paths to travel. Brilliant stuff, Square. Still, it was certainly a unique premise that hadn't been done too much before. So, how well does Octopath Traveler do at putting a unique premise and visual style into practice? Grab some companions, have a drink at a tavern, and let's turn the page to Octopath Traveler for the Nintendo Switch. Octopath Traveler was originally released exclusively for the Nintendo Switch in 2018, then being released on Windows in 2019, Google Stadia, may it rest in peace, in 2020, and finally Xbox One in 2022. Octopath has 8 playable characters living in the grand world of Ostera. All 8 characters have their own playstyle and story to follow, with 4 chapters per character story. Each of the 8 characters were based on different occupations of medieval Europe. We have Olbrich the warrior, in search of a man who betrayed him and struck down his lord. Ophelia the cleric, who must perform a ritual known as the Kindling as part of a sacred pilgrimage. Cyrus the scholar, who leaves on a quest to find a long-lost toll after being falsely accused of a scandal with the city's princess. Alphen the apothecary, who wishes to travel the world and heal those in need, to follow in the footsteps of a man who saved his life when he was a boy. Tressa the merchant, who wishes to see the world and hone her craft. Therion the thief, who falls for a trap and needs to find 3 dragon stones to remove a mark of shame that was placed upon him. Primrose the dancer, who is seeking revenge against the 3 men who murdered her father when she was a child. And finally, we have Hanet the hunter, who goes on a quest in search of her master, who disappeared after hunting a strange beast known as Red Eye. When you first start the game, you are free to select any of the 8 characters and start their story, to which after that you'll need to travel from town to town to recruit the rest of the party and play through their adventure. After completing your starting character's first chapter, the game really opens up for how the player can go about playing through the different paths. You can recruit the rest of the cast in any order you wish, and once recruited you can freely swap out party members at a tavern. You have a lot of freedom in how you wish to go about each character's respective narrative, which is commendable, and lets you kind of craft your own adventure and party setups. You can play through all 8 characters' chapters as they appear, or if you prefer, you can get a party of 4, play through those characters' stories before recruiting the next 4 and playing through with them. The actual plot of the stories on offer are relatively simple. I didn't find any particularly complex, nor are there really any grand plot twists. These stories are a mixed bag. With such a wide range of stories, it's natural that each player will find some tales which intrigue them and others that aren't quite as effective. For every character whom I found had a compelling and well-written story like Alphen or Cyrus, there was another story I found equally as uninteresting and dull, such as Therion and Ophelia. I think my personal favorite character was Tressa. Her story isn't extraordinary, it's a pretty easygoing tale of a young merchant going out and seeing the world. But compared to the other 7 stories, her path is much more lighthearted, which made for a nice break during the darker moments of the other tales. Plus, Tressa's good-natured yet crafty personality made for a refreshing protagonist, and she was very fun to see in action. The problem with having 8 separate stories is that the way the game is structured leads to things feeling very disjointed. Each chapter in a character's story has a recommended level you should be at before tackling them. However, these levels don't change depending on which character you pick as your starter. For example, I selected Ulbrich as my starting character, so he would be the first story I experienced. However, his second chapter had a recommended level of 27, as opposed to most of the other cast, which had a second chapter recommendation of level 22 to 24. As such, I decided to pursue most of the other second chapters before finally getting back to Ulbrich. However, by the time I started the second chapter of Ulbrich's story, it was 19 hours later. It was difficult to get properly engaged with the individual stories when there can be such long breaks in between each chapter, and it can make some of these narratives feel messy. Though I will say that the simple bite-sized stories can be good for players who maybe drop RPGs and come back to them after a while, as the game does a good job at recapping the story so far at the start of each chapter, and since they are complex, they are easy to jump back into, even after being away for a while. What's also unfortunate is that each of the 8 stories are completely standalone from the other. Tressa won't play a role in Tharion's story, Ulbrich won't play a role in Primose's story, etc. Because you can recruit each party member in any order, each story has to assume you don't have a particular party member when you start the next chapter. What this means is that your party barely interacts with each other. Some of the strongest aspects of RPGs is the synergy between a diverse range of personalities going on an adventure with each other. But there's virtually none of that here. During each chapter, there are brief moments where you can view some travel banter, where a party member will speak with whichever character has their chapter ongoing. These interactions are brief, and they're the only time the party members will ever acknowledge each other's existence, which is such a waste. These are 8 characters with distinct personalities and ambitions. There's so much potential for interesting conversations between each character. Instead, each character is restricted to only talking to NPCs exclusive to the particular tale, outside of these limited travel banter moments, and it makes the characters so much weaker as a party because of it. Even during cutscenes, any party member who isn't the main character of the particular tale will just completely disappear, as if they're not even there. It's such a shame, because the game has some really good writing, especially in the dialogue department. Each character has a very distinct manner of speech, which strongly reflects their personality and their upbringing, which tells a lot about them through simple dialogue. That said, Hanet's dialect gets really obnoxious after a while. She and her people speak in ye olde English. I'm not an expert on the language, so maybe it's perfectly accurate. But how it's written here feels really overdone, and it sounds like the kind of dialogue my friends and I would use to make fun of Shakespearean speech back in high school.
"'Tis not the hunt that concerneth me. Thou intendest to stop and off somewhere along the way."
"Oh, here and there, mayhap. Why dost thou ask?"
"Thou forgettest or feignst ignorance, so I will remind thee."
What are you two fucking talking about?
Otherwise, there is some really strong character dialogue on display in Octopath. Each chapter will only commence once you reach a particular town. Getting from town to town was actually a lot of fun. The player can look at the map to see the general area of your next stop, to which you'll need to follow signs to make your way to the town. This process made me feel like I was going on a proper adventure. I didn't really know the right way to reach the location, so I would need to follow the signs, and I never really knew what to expect as I was on my journey. It was honestly thrilling. Plus, the game has a fast travel between each town once you reach it, so you don't need to repeatedly go back and forth after the fact, which is definitely a welcome inclusion due to how big this map is. The thrill of exploring was bolstered by the game's gorgeous visual presentation. Each town and environment resembles something of a diorama, using nice sprite work and HD lighting and effects to create what is probably one of the most visually striking art directions I have ever seen. The visuals made the world of Ostera feel grand and beautiful, making exploring it feel worthwhile. Exploring each environment won't be easy, however, as there will be numerous enemies to fight along the way, bringing us to the game's combat. Each of the 8 characters has a unique job, granting them certain weapons they can use and elemental abilities. You'll notice each enemy has a shield with a number underneath them. This is the enemy's break gauge. Each enemy has a certain weakness, and if you hit your foe with the proper weakness, their gauge will go down by 1. Once the gauge reaches 0, the enemy will break, which makes them unable to move for a turn, as well as take double damage from attacks. Making proper use of the break gauge is the key to success, and there are a number of applications that the player can use with it. For example, I would always prefer to set up debuffs on the enemy and buffs on my party, so that when the enemy broke, I could have a round of some of my most powerful attacks. However, it's just as viable to wait until the enemy is about to use one of their strongest attacks to break them, or use that free turn to heal up and recover. Additionally, each round your player will get a gold dot over their health bar, which each character will be able to hold up to 5. Expending one of these will boost the character using it by 1, being able to be boosted up to 3 times. Boosting can provide a massive amount of options, as it will make whatever ability your character uses much more effective. Boosted normal attacks will hit in additional time, special attacks will deal more damage, healing moves will heal more, status effects will last longer, and boosted defense will reduce the damage you take. Knowing the right time to boost and make the most of each character's individual abilities can be the difference between winning and losing a battle, so making proper use of the boost is essential. This is a very good battle system, one that requires a lot of strategy on the part of the player to overcome their foes. I wouldn't describe Octopath Traveler as an easy game by any stretch, especially when it comes to Octopath's numerous boss fights. The boss fights are easily Octopath's biggest highlight in the gameplay department. Each boss fight will have some sort of gimmick to it, such as the enemy blocking their break gauge until the other enemies are defeated, or the boss having the ability to inflict all kinds of status effects on you. These fights are tough, and they're not short romps either, with some boss fights taking up to half an hour to defeat, even longer if you're not particularly aggressive in your playstyle. There were a few frustrating fights, but for the most part I found the boss fights were excellent at testing your abilities without feeling ludicrously difficult. They were proper challenges that I found satisfying to overcome. As a side note, one thing about the boss fights is that the boss is depicted as being much larger than your party, even if the boss in question is an ordinary human. Even common enemies appear much bigger than the playable characters. At first I thought this looked a bit goofy, but the more I played, the more I came to appreciate it. It makes each enemy feel large and imposing, and the bosses looked especially powerful with how much they towered over you. So I actually came to quite like this visual decision, despite my reservations towards it at the start. A negative I do have about the combat is because of the break mechanics and the focus on strategy, fights can be slow. Really slow. This isn't a problem in of itself. As I said, the slower pace makes for interesting strategizing against tougher foes and bosses. However, this also means the simplest of random encounters can take a while, even if you're several levels higher than the enemy. And you'll need to fight a lot of enemies as you explore the world of Ostera. Since each battle took so long, I started to get really burned out of the combat quickly, doubly so whenever I needed to grind, and I needed to do a lot of grinding in Octopath. Since you can only have 4 members in your party at a time, there will always be 4 other characters not getting experience as you progress throughout the chapters. So whenever chapters came up, if I hadn't used them in a while, I would need to spend an hour or so getting them up to an appropriate level for the chapter. When I did Honnet's first chapter, the recommended level was 11 for the boss fight. However, her second chapter had a recommended level of 27. I tried to rotate the party regularly to ensure an equal division of experience, but by the time I got to her second chapter, she was only level 15, meaning I had to spend 2 hours getting her up to par. It wouldn't have taken nearly as long if it wasn't for the slower approach to combat Octopath has, and it would kill a lot of my enthusiasm when I would realize I would need to do a grinding session at the start of almost every chapter. The problem for grinding also pertains to money, as since I decided to play through the game with all 8 characters, I would also need to grind to buy equipment. I found that money did not come easy in Octopath, and good equipment was particularly expensive. So whenever a character rejoined the party, I would need to grind for money as well, to make sure their equipment was up to snuff. This became especially tedious for characters who could hold up to 4 weapons, like my reclass Tressa or Honnet. So I would need to save up to get 4 good weapons per character. It was honestly just exhausting. This makes Octopath a long RPG. Going through each story without spending too much time exploring will take the player around 60 hours, while those who seek out hidden dungeons, perform the game's various side quests, and play the game's sizable post-game can expect to commit over 100 hours. Depending on whether or not you appreciate the slower gameplay, will change whether you consider this a good or bad thing. Another negative is whichever character you select as your starting character will remain locked to your party until you complete all 4 of their chapters, which essentially takes you close to the end of the game. I don't know why they decided to do this, as all it does is restrict the possible party combinations for most of the game. Now, the character I selected first, Ulbrich, is easily the best damage dealer in the game. As such, having him stuck in my party wasn't a huge deal, so in that regard I was lucky. However, I found myself not particularly liking Therion all that much, as I found his debuffs and lack of abilities that hit multiple opponents rather weak outside of boss fights. If he was the character I started with, and I had to be permanently stuck with this character I didn't like for the rest of the game, I would have been irritated. It's just such an unnecessary restriction, and it only serves to limit the player. As you explore Ostera, you will occasionally find shrines that will allow each character to acquire a secondary job, based on the existing classes of the rest of the cast. For example, once I find the shrine for the healer, I can have a party member like Ulbrich get the secondary job of Apothecary, giving him access to the same weapon and job skills otherwise exclusive to Alphen. This allows for the customization of a few combination of abilities, making characters more effective and increasing their number of abilities. That being said, since it's based off of classes that are already used by other party members, it does serve to make each character feel less unique. Therian's ability to debuff opponents becomes much less special when I can give the same ability to Tressa. Still, there are some abilities that remain exclusive to each character, such as Therian being the only character that can open purple chests, or Alphen's ability to concoct special items on the fly, so characters are never truly rendered irrelevant, they just feel less special. On the topic of unique abilities, each character has access to unique skills outside of battle called path actions. Each path action is shared between two characters, with one character having the noble path action, and the other having the rogue path action. For example, Alphen and Cyrus both have the ability to speak with NPCs and get unique information, such as their age, backstory, and occasionally these will even give you hints about secret dungeons hidden around the world. However, Alphen has the noble path action, which means it can be performed without consequence as long as he's at the necessary level. Meanwhile, Cyrus has the rogue path action, which means you can perform it at any level, but with a percentage of it failing. Failing these will cause your reputation to suffer, and you will be unable to use any more path actions. This can only be restored by paying a hefty sum at the tavern, so there's punishment for trying to abuse the rogue path action. Ulbrich and Honik can challenge NPCs to battle, which can net you extra experience or grant you access to certain areas. Ophelia and Primrose can use Guide and Allure, which lets an NPC tag along, and even be summoned in battle with unique attacks. Finally, my favorite are Tressa and Therian, who have the most distinction between their abilities. Tressa can buy items off NPCs for the right price, usually items that you won't be able to find in typical stores. Meanwhile, Therian can outright steal the items for free.
Free?
But the better items are very difficult to succeed on. The path actions were really cool inclusions. It gives each character some extra flair outside of battle. I didn't mind that these actions are shared among characters, as I believe the noble and rogue categories do a good job at making the abilities feel distinct from each other. Octopath Traveler is an interesting game. It does a lot right, with its stellar visuals, gameplay which gives players tons of options on how to best proceed, and fun exploration. However, for every success, there's a stumble which makes the game much harder to want to go back to, with its disjointed stories, little interaction between the cast, heavy need for grinding, and slow pace of battles. Not everyone will share the same dislikes I have with this game, and if you're okay with a slow-paced RPG with short stories, then you're likely going to have an amazing time with Octopath Traveler. I just feel Octopath requires a very specific type of RPG fan for everything to really click. On my first playthrough of this game 4 years ago, the novelty of 8 different stories and HD sprite work was fresh and new enough that it distracted me from a lot of the game's issues. For RPGs, around 30 to maybe 40 hours is a comfortable length for me, but even then, I'm counting on the story and interactions between the various characters to be what keeps me invested during the long adventure. With this game being over 60 hours with very little interaction, and some of the stories being just plain dull, I struggle to want to push myself forward while playing. Even the best RPG battle systems will become tiring without any extra spice in other areas to keep up engagement. As such, playing through Octopath with a much more critical lens, while still a good game, it just has too much that doesn't suit me, and as such, I'm unlikely to want to revisit the game in the future because of it. There's a lot of good in Octopath, and with the upcoming release of Octopath Traveler 2, I'm interested to see if my personal complaints with this entry are changed in the sequel. They already confirmed that the party will interact with each other during the story, which definitely has me excited. Until then though, I'll patiently wait to see if Octopath Traveler 2 looks to scratch more of an itch than this game did. All that said, I will unfortunately be placing Octopath Traveler at the number 14 spot. There's good here. Hell, some people may adore this game, but for my taste, this is a game I wouldn't care to revisit for a long while. For those of you who have played this game for yourselves, what do you think of Octopath Traveler? Anything you disagree with? I'd love to hear your opinions in the comments. Next time, we'll be taking a look at a well-loved classic, one which incidentally has an upcoming remake this month. You can probably tell what game it is based on that description alone, but if not, I won't spoil the surprise. In any case, thank you all so much for watching. Take care. May we see each other again when we turn to the next chapter in the Tome of Silver.